Picture this: a vast, shimmering expanse of blue, stretching from the shores of Africa to the spice-laden coasts of India and beyond. For centuries, the Indian Ocean wasn't just water. It was a pulsing artery of commerce, culture, and connection, a highway where empires rose and fortunes were made. Yet today, if you stood on the beaches where bustling ports once thrived, you'd hear only the waves, no shouts of traders, no creaking of ships laden with silk and spices, no echoes of languages from distant lands. The ports that once defined this maritime world have vanished, swallowed by time, leaving behind fragments of their stories buried in sand and sea. How could such vital hubs of human activity simply disappear? And what secrets do their ruins hold about the rise and fall of civilizations? This is a story of forgotten empires and the silent witnesses they left behind. Think of the Indian Ocean trade routes as the internet of the ancient world, a network so vast and intricate that it connected people from Zanzibar to Java, from the Persian Gulf to the shores of China. Goods like ivory, gold, and porcelain traveled thousands of miles, but so did ideas, religions, and innovations. The ports along these routes weren't just docks, they were melting pots where cultures collided and blended, where a single marketplace could feel like the center of the world. Yet today, many of these ports are little more than ghost towns, their names erased from maps, their grandeur reduced to crumbling stones and half-remembered legends. What happened to them? Was it shifting trade winds, rising sea levels, or the whims of empires that sealed their fate? We're about to embark on a journey to uncover these lost chapters of history. Together, we'll follow the trails of ancient mariners, decode the clues left behind in shipwrecks and ruins, and piece together the puzzle of why these once great ports faded into obscurity. Along the way, you'll meet the merchants who braved unpredictable seas, the rulers who grew wealthy from distant trade, and the ordinary people whose lives were shaped by the ebb and flow of this maritime world. This isn't just a tale of the past, it's a reminder of how interconnected our world has always been, and how easily the footprints of history can vanish beneath the tides. So let's set sail into the unknown, because the secrets of the Indian Ocean's lost ports are waiting to be discovered. Long before the age of steamships and GPS, the Indian Ocean's trade routes thrived on something far more unpredictable: the rhythm of the winds. Every year, like clockwork, the monsoon winds shifted direction, creating a natural highway for sailors. From April to September, the winds blew steadily northeast, carrying ships from the coast of Africa toward India. Then, as the seasons changed, the winds reversed, sweeping traders back home with their hulls packed full of treasures. This wasn't just commerce, it was a dance with nature, one that required patience, skill, and an intimate knowledge of the sea's moods. The goods that traveled these waters weren't just commodities, they were the building blocks of empires. Imagine the docks of ancient Muziris in southern India, where Roman coins mingled with Arabian perfumes and Chinese silks. Or the bustling port of Rhapta on the East African coast, where ivory and tortoiseshell from the continent's interior were traded for glassware and wine from distant Rome. These weren't just transactions, they were exchanges that transformed societies. A single shipment of pepper from India could fetch a fortune in Rome, while African gold financed the rise of powerful kingdoms like Axum in modern-day Ethiopia. But what made this trade network truly extraordinary wasn't just the wealth it generated, it was the way it connected people. A merchant from Oman might share a meal with a sailor from Java, while a Persian trader haggled over prices with a local vendor in Zanzibar. Languages, religions, and customs blended in these ports, creating vibrant, cosmopolitan hubs where a single street could feel like a crossroads of the world. The spread of Buddhism from India to Southeast Asia, the flow of Islamic scholarship along the Swahili Coast, even the introduction of bananas to Africa, all of these were ripple effects of this vast maritime web. Yet for all its brilliance, the Indian Ocean trade never had a single ruler or centralized control. Unlike the Silk Road, which depended on the stability of empires like China and Persia, this maritime network was decentralized, resilient, and adaptable. If one port fell to conflict or disaster, ships simply rerouted to another. This flexibility allowed the trade to flourish for centuries, outlasting dynasties and surviving upheavals that might have shattered other systems. But that same lack of centralization also meant that when decline finally came, it left behind scattered clues rather than a clear story, a puzzle we're still piecing together today. So why has this monumental chapter of history been overshadowed by the Silk Road in our textbooks? Perhaps because land routes leave behind more visible ruins, caravanserais, fortresses, and well-trodden paths. The ocean, though, keeps its secrets. Shipwrecks dissolve into the depths, ports sink beneath rising tides, and wooden docks rot away. But the legacy of this forgotten highway lingers in the genetic traces of distant peoples mingled along coastal towns, in the spices that still define cuisines from Zanzibar to Malacca, and in the echoes of languages that once bridged entire continents. To understand its rise is to glimpse a world far more interconnected than we often realize, one that set the stage for the globalized age we live in today. The Indian Ocean's trade routes were never just about goods, they were about people. Picture an Arab merchant haggling over spices in a Malabar port, his ship laden with frankincense from Oman. Or a Chinese admiral like Zheng He, whose massive treasure fleets dwarfed European ships by centuries, sailing all the way to Africa with porcelain and silk. These weren't just traders, they were bridges between worlds, carrying more than cargo in their holds. Take the Gujarati merchants of Western India, whose networks stretched from the Red Sea to Southeast Asia. They didn't just sell textiles and gems, they became custodians of ideas, spreading Hinduism and Buddhism to places like Bali and Cambodia. Temples in Java still bear Sanskrit inscriptions, while the epic Ramayana took root in Thai culture, all because of these seafaring middlemen. Meanwhile, on the Swahili Coast, cities like Kilwa and Mombasa thrived as cosmopolitan hubs where African rulers traded gold and ivory for Persian ceramics and Indian cotton. The Swahili language itself, a blend of Bantu roots and Arabic influence, is a living testament to this cultural fusion. Then there were the empires pulling the strings from afar. The Abbasid Caliphate, with its capital in Baghdad, turned the Persian Gulf into a highway for knowledge as much as commerce. Arab scholars translated Greek texts in one direction and carried Indian numerals, the ancestors of the numbers we use today, in the other. Down in southern India, the Chola dynasty sent naval expeditions as far as Sumatra, leaving behind towering bronze statues of Hindu gods in places like Vietnam. These weren't just military campaigns, they were cultural revolutions, with Chola temples becoming blueprints for architecture across Southeast Asia. But the real unsung heroes were the mariners, the anonymous sailors who braved monsoons and pirates to keep this network alive. Their navigational tools were simple: stars, wind patterns, and centuries of oral tradition passed down through generations. A dhow captain from Yemen might rely on the camel, a wooden board to measure the stars, while Malay pilots used mental maps of ocean currents so precise they could find tiny islands without charts. This wasn't just skill, it was an intimate dialogue with the natural world, one that modern GPS can't replicate. What's astonishing is how these players coexisted without a single hegemon. Unlike the Mediterranean, where Rome or Venice dominated, the Indian Ocean thrived on collaboration. A Jewish merchant from Cairo might partner with a Hindu banker in Calicut, while a Malay crew sailed for an Arab sponsor. Disputes were settled through shared customs, not empires. This was globalization before the word existed, a delicate equilibrium of trust and mutual interest that lasted longer than most modern economies. Yet today, we remember the Silk Road's camel caravans far more than these maritime pioneers. Maybe it's because land routes leave clearer footprints, or because Europe's later age of exploration overshadowed what came before. But the Indian Ocean story is far richer, a tapestry woven not by conquest, but by countless threads of human connection. From the spread of Islam along the Swahili Coast to the cloves of Zanzibar that flavored medieval European feasts, these quiet exchanges shaped our world in ways we're only beginning to rediscover. Among the many vanished wonders of the Indian Ocean trade, few spark as much mystery as Muziris, the legendary port that served as India's glittering gateway to the world. Imagine a waterfront so vibrant that Roman ships arrived brimming with gold coins, only to depart laden with pepper so precious it was worth its weight in silver. Greek texts called it the first emporium of India, while Tamil poets sang of its streets lined with merchants from Alexandria, Baghdad, and beyond. This wasn't just a port, it was a symphony of cultures where Arabian perfumes mingled with Chinese silks and African ivory under the swaying palms of Kerala. Yet by the mid-14th century, Muziris had vanished so completely that historians debated whether it was real or myth. The culprit, a perfect storm of nature and human neglect. In 1341, a monstrous flood, possibly a cyclone or tsunami, slammed into the Malabar coast, choking the Periyar River with silt and diverting its course overnight. The harbor that once welcomed ocean-going vessels became a swamp, stranding ships and drowning warehouses beneath layers of mud. But here's the twist, floods weren't uncommon in this region. What sealed Muziris' fate wasn't just the disaster itself, but a shift in the very foundations of trade. Archaeologists digging near modern-day Patanom have unearthed clues that read like a detective's dossier. Roman amphorae that once held wine from Italy, shattered Yemeni glass, even a brick wharf designed to handle massive cargo ships, all whisper of a city built for global business. But the most telling find, a hoard of Roman coins from the reign of Emperor Tiberius, proof that Muziris was Rome's direct line to India's spice wealth. For centuries, the port thrived because it sat at the sweet spot of monsoon winds and river access, funneling goods inland via waterways. When the river abandoned its course, the lifeblood of trade dried up with it. Yet other ports survived natural disasters. So why wasn't Muziris rebuilt? The answer lies in the changing tides of politics and profit. By the 14th century, the Chola dynasty's influence was waning, and new powers like the Zamorins of Calicut were rising farther north. With them came shifts in trade routes, ones that favored ports like Kozhikode, where deeper waters could handle larger Arab and Chinese ships. Meanwhile, the Black Death was ravaging Eurasia, disrupting the very networks that had fed Muziris' prosperity. The world moved on, and the once great port faded into folk memory, surviving only in scattered poems and the ledgers of Venetian traders who still dreamed of its pepper groves. Today, the story of Muziris is a cautionary tale about the fragility of even the mightiest hubs. A port that once anchored entire economies now lies buried beneath rice paddies and fishing villages, its grandeur reduced to fragments in a museum case. But its legacy lives on in unexpected ways in the Syrian Christian communities descended from its cosmopolitan settlers, in the black pepper that still grows in Kerala's hills, and in the stubborn human belief that somewhere beneath the silt and shadows, the emporium of legends still waits to be found. While Muziris vanished beneath river silt, another great port disappeared into the tides of the Indian Ocean Rhapta, the African emporium that classical geographers called the southernmost trading post of the ancient world. Picture a bustling harbor where Bantu merchants bargained over piles of ivory with Greek and Arab traders, where tortoiseshell from nearby reefs was stacked high for export to Rome's elite workshops. Ptolemy's 2nd century maps placed it somewhere along the coast of Azania, what we now call Tanzania, but centuries of searching have turned Raptor into a maritime mirage, its true location debated as fiercely as Atlantis. What makes Raptor's disappearance so tantalizing is how abruptly it vanished from history. Greek merchants described it as a hub where African middlemen brought gold from Zimbabwe's interior and ivory from the great herds of the mainland. Yet by the time Arab geographers like al-Masudi wrote their chronicles in the 10th century, Rhapta was already a ghost, remembered only as that ancient city swallowed by the sea. Was it coastal erosion that drowned its wharves, or did shifting trade routes starve it of relevance? The answer might lie in a paradox Rhapta's prosperity may have doomed it. Archaeologists hunting for Rhapta face a puzzle wrapped in mangrove roots and coral. Roman coins dug up near Dar-es-Salaam hint at Mediterranean connections, while 6th century Byzantine pottery shards found on Zanzibar suggest trade endured long after Ptolemy's era. But the most compelling clue comes from the sea itself. Off the coast of Tanzania, sonar scans have revealed submerged stone structures near the Rufiji Delta, a region matching Ptolemy's description of Rhapta's 2 rivers. Could these be the remains of docks swallowed by rising waters? It wouldn't be unique. Nearby Kilwa Kisiwani's medieval port now lies partially underwater due to shifting coastlines. Yet others argue Rhapta's fate was tied to something harder to excavate: the fickle loyalties of commerce. As Arab traders grew dominant in the 8th century, they bypassed Rhapta for better anchored ports like Manda and Shanga further north. Without ships to sustain it, the port's wooden structures rotted, its markets fell silent, and the jungle reclaimed its streets. The irony: Rhapta's descendants might still be there. The Makonde people of southern Tanzania passed down oral histories of a great trading town by the sea, its name lost but its memory lingering like the scent of monsoon winds on salt air. The search for Rhapta isn't just about stones and coins, it's about reclaiming Africa's erased maritime heritage. For too long, the narrative of Indian Ocean trade has centered on Arab and Indian merchants, as if African coasts were passive backdrops. But Rhapta's existence proves otherwise. This was a place where African rulers set the terms of trade, where Bantu boatbuilders crafted the iconic Mteep vessels, ships sewn together with coconut fiber, so resilient they outlasted European hulls in tropical waters. Finding Rhapta would rewrite history, proving the Swahili Coast wasn't just a destination for foreign traders, but a cradle of globalization in its own right. So why does Rhapta still hide? Perhaps because the ocean guards its secrets well. Unlike desert ruins, coastal cities leave fragile traces: wood dissolves, pottery scatters with the tides, and shorelines retreat. But every shard of Roman glass pulled from Tanzanian soil, every Swahili oral poem mentioning the old port, brings us closer to solving this 1500-year-old riddle. Until then, Rhapta remains the Indian Ocean's most stubborn ghost, a reminder that some stories refuse to stay buried, even beneath the waves. Nestled along the jagged coastline of southern Persia, the ruins of Siraf whisper tales of a time when this port was the beating heart of the Indian Ocean's trade. Imagine walking through its skeletal remains today, crumbling warehouses where sacks of Chinese porcelain once sat, empty cisterns that once held fresh water for thousands of sailors, and the ghostly outline of a bazaar where merchants haggled over spices from Malacca and pearls from Bahrain. In its 8th century heyday, Seraf wasn't just a stopover. It was the linchpin connecting the Abbasid Caliphate to the riches of the East, a place where Persian navigators perfected the art of monsoon sailing to reach ports as far as Guangzhou. What made Seraf extraordinary wasn't just its wealth, it was its ingenuity. Unlike ports dependent on river access, Seraf thrived in a harsh, arid landscape by mastering the art of water conservation. Engineers carved intricate canal systems to channel groundwater, while massive stone reservoirs stored monsoon rains. The port shipbuilders crafted vessels uniquely suited to the Gulf's shallow waters, their hulls reinforced with coconut fiber, a technique borrowed from Swahili sailors. This adaptability turned Seraf into a crossroads where Mesopotamian dates met Sumatran camphor, where Persian carpets were traded for Tang Dynasty celadon. A single ship's manifest from the 9th century lists lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, sandalwood from Timor, and even a live rhinoceros destined for the caliph's menagerie in Baghdad. Yet by the 12th century, Seraf lay in ruins, its glory erased by a cascade of disasters. The first blow came from beneath the earth, a devastating earthquake in 977 that shattered its seawalls and toppled minarets. Then came the slow death of shifting trade routes, as Arab sailors pioneered direct routes to India and China. Bypassing the Gulf, Seraf's middleman role faded. Rival ports like Hormuz rose to prominence, offering deeper harbors and closer ties to Mongol-controlled Silk Road routes, but the final insult came from nature itself. Sediment from upstream erosion gradually silted Seraf's harbor, turning what was once a bustling anchorage into a stagnant lagoon. Archaeologists peeling back Seraf's layers have uncovered a microcosm of globalization's fragility. Excavations revealed charred timbers from a fire that ravaged the customs house, half-woven baskets abandoned mid-stitch, and even a child's wooden toy left behind in the rush to evacuate. These aren't just artifacts, they're frozen moments of a city's unraveling. Yet Seraf's legacy lingers in unexpected ways. Its shipbuilding techniques influenced how construction from Oman to Zanzibar, while its water management systems became blueprints for desert cities across the Islamic world. The story of Seraf is a stark reminder that no hub, no matter how prosperous, is immune to the tides of change. Climate shifts, political upheavals, and even geological bad luck can erase centuries of achievement in a generation. But look closer at those ruins and you'll find something enduring, the indelible mark of a place that once knit continents together, proving that even in abandonment, the echoes of connection never fully fade. While the temples of the Chola dynasty still tower over southern India, their true masterpiece wasn't carved from stone, it was woven from waves. At its peak in the 11th century, this empire didn't just build shrines, it commanded a navy so formidable that its influence stretched from the pearl-rich waters of Sri Lanka to the Spice Islands of Indonesia. Picture a fleet of sleek catamaran warships, their hulls lashed together with coconut rope, cutting through monsoon swells as they escorted merchant vessels laden with Tamil textiles and bronze idols. This wasn't just trade, it was a calculated display of power where every cargo ship doubled as an ambassador of Chola might, the dynasty's secret weapon. A blend of military precision and cultural diplomacy. When Rajendra Chola launched his audacious campaign against the Srivijaya Empire in modern-day Sumatra in 1025, It wasn't merely a raid, it was a masterclass in maritime strategy. His forces didn't just sack ports, they dismantled Srivijaya's control over the Malacca Strait, the chokehold of Asian trade. By redirecting spice routes through Chola-friendly harbors, Rajendra turned his kingdom into the toll booth of the Indian Ocean. Temples from Thanjavur to Prambanan soon bore inscriptions boasting of gold brought from conquered lands, but the real treasure was control. For nearly a century, no ship could sail between China and the Middle East without paying tribute or taxes to Chola intermediaries. Yet this dominance unraveled with startling speed. By the 13th century, Chola ships had vanished from foreign ports, their naval records fading into palm leaf manuscripts. Climate shifts played a role. Weakening monsoons disrupted traditional sailing routes, but the empire's rigid hierarchy proved its Achilles heel. As Chola nobles obsessed over temple donations, they neglected the merchant guilds that fueled their wealth. Meanwhile, upstart kingdoms like the Pandya dynasty courted Arab traders with better terms, while Chinese Song dynasty junks began bypassing Southeast Asia altogether. The final blow came from within. A succession crisis fractured the empire just as Mongol invasions reshaped global trade networks. What makes the Chola collapse so revelatory isn't just its causes, it's the echoes we see today. Like modern tech giants or shipping conglomerates, their empire thrived by controlling bottlenecks, then faltered when innovation rendered those choke points obsolete. The dynasty's legacy lingers in unexpected places, in the Tamil loanwords woven into Malay and Thai, in the bronze Shiva statues still revered in Indonesian villages, and in the sobering truth that no maritime power, no matter how brilliant, is immune to the tides of change. Their story isn't just about lost glory, it's a warning etched in seawater about the fragility of networks built on dominance alone. The Swahili Coast was more than just a shoreline, it was a dazzling mosaic of cultures where the rhythm of the ocean shaped civilizations. Picture the island of Kilwa Kisiwani in its prime, a skyline of coral brick palaces and grand mosques with domes that caught the morning sun, their reflections shimmering in the harbor below. Here, African rulers sat on ivory inlaid thrones, negotiating with Omani merchants who'd sailed thousands of miles on monsoon winds. The air would have been thick with the scent of cloves from Zanzibar, the tang of salt from Persian Gulf fish, and the earthy richness of mangrove poles stacked high for export to the treeless deserts of Arabia. This wasn't just trade, it was alchemy transforming raw materials into architectural marvels, linguistic hybrids, and a way of life unlike anywhere else on Earth. What made these cities extraordinary was their ability to blend worlds without losing themselves. Take the Great Mosque of Kilwa, built in the 11th century with a vaulted roof of coral stone, a technique borrowed from Arab builders but adapted to local materials. Or the palaces of Husuni Kubwa, where Persian-inspired arches framed courtyards cooled by African baobab trees. Even language became a fusion. Swahili, with its Bantu grammar and Arabic script, turned into the lingua franca of commerce, allowing a Malagasy trader to haggle with a Yemeni ship captain over bolts of Indian cotton. The coast's golden age wasn't about domination by foreign powers. It was about Africans setting the terms of exchange, curating what entered their ports and what left. Yet by the 16th century, this delicate equilibrium began to crumble. The first cracks appeared with the arrival of Portuguese Caravels in 1498, their cannons trained on Kilwa's undefended harbor. Unlike Arab traders who'd integrated into Swahili society, the Europeans saw these cities as prizes to be seized. They imposed brutal taxes, disrupted traditional trade networks, and diverted gold shipments around the Cape of Good Hope, cutting the Swahili coast out of the loop. But the Portuguese weren't the only threat. As Ottoman and Omani empires vied for control, Kilwa became a pawn in global power struggles, its autonomy eroded by distant rulers who cared little for its unique culture. Nature, too, turned against these coastal gems. Rising sea levels, possibly linked to the Little Ice Age, began swallowing waterfront neighborhoods, while silt from inland deforestation clogged harbors. Archaeologists diving off Kilwa have found stone pillars standing upright beneath the waves, silent sentinels of a shoreline that's retreated over centuries. Yet the greatest tragedy wasn't the physical decay, it was the erasure of memory. European colonizers dismissed Swahili cities as Arab outposts, ignoring their African roots. For generations, textbooks portrayed the coast as a passive recipient of foreign influence, rather than the creative powerhouse it truly was. Today, the ruins whisper a different story. In the mortar between Kilwa's coral bricks, scientists have found seeds from African millet and grains from Indian rice, proof of a cuisine born from two continents. In Zanzibar's archives, centuries-old deeds show women inheriting property and running businesses, challenging stereotypes about gender roles in pre-colonial Africa. Even the coins tell tales, minted with names of Swahili sultans but imitating the design of Fatimid dinars. They're tangible evidence of a culture confident enough to borrow, adapt, and innovate. The lesson of the Swahili Coast isn't just about collapse, it's about resilience. Long after Portuguese cannons fell silent, the cultural DNA of these cities lived on. In the rhythms of Tarab music, blending Arab lutes with African drums, in the recipes of Zanzibar's spice markets, where cardamom from India meets coconut from the tropics, and in the very word Swahili, which comes from the Arabic for coast, but has come to symbolize something uniquely African. These ports may have faded, but their legacy is a testament to what happens when cultures meet as equals, creating something far greater than the sum of their parts. Deep in the rainforests of northern Sumatra, the name Baras still echoes like a half-remembered dream. This wasn't just another port, it was the Vatican of camphor, the sacred resin so prized in ancient times that Egyptian embalmers, Chinese physicians, and Roman perfumers would pay fortunes for even a handful. Picture ships from Gujarat and Gwangju jostling for space in its harbor, their captains bartering silk and silver for lumps of aromatic crystal harvested from the towering Dryabalanaps trees inland. For over 1,000 years, Baras was the only place on Earth producing this mystical substance, said to cure headaches, ward off evil spirits, and preserve the bodies of pharaohs. Yet today, if you search modern maps for Baras, you'll find only a quiet fishing village, its glory days erased as thoroughly as if they'd never been. What happened to this legendary entrepot? Clues are scattered like puzzle pieces across time and terrain. Medieval Arab geographers like Ibn Khordadbeh wrote of Baras as a bustling metropolis where foreign merchants waited months for the annual camphor harvest. A 12th century Jewish trader's letter, preserved in the Cairo Geniza, complains about the outrageous prices demanded by Baras middlemen. Yet by the time the Portuguese arrived in the 16th century, they found only overgrown ruins and locals who spoke of a great city eaten by the earth. The jungle had reclaimed its own. Recent archaeological digs have peeled back layers of this mystery. Teams sifting through the soil near modern-day Baras have unearthed Chinese porcelain shards stamped with Song Dynasty marks, Persian glassware, and most telling fragments of camphor distillation apparatus. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source: oral histories. Elders in Batak villages recount legends of a sudden catastrophe, a great shaking, followed by floods that buried the city. Geological surveys now suggest an earthquake may have triggered landslides, blocking the port's access to the sea, while malaria-infested swamps crept inland. Yet nature alone doesn't explain Barus' demise. Like Venice or Tyre, its fate was tied to the whims of global demand. As synthetic camphor spread from China in the 14th century, the allure of Barus' natural resin faded. Rival ports like Malacca and Assaye rose to prominence, offering safer harbors and bulk spices. By the time European traders arrived, Barus was already a ghost, its secrets preserved only in the rituals of local shamans who still use wild camphor in ceremonies, passing down knowledge that once made this place the axis of an aromatic empire. The story of Barus is more than a cautionary tale. It's a testament to how even the most indispensable hubs can vanish when technology, nature, and politics collide. Today, scientists studying Sumatra's dwindling camphor trees warn that the species could face extinction within decades, taking with it the last living thread to this lost world. But wander the backstreets of the modern village, and you might catch a whiff of something familiar, the sharp, clean scent of camphor lingering in the air, as if the trees themselves refuse to let history forget. The monsoon winds didn't just guide ships across the Indian Ocean, they dictated the very rhythm of life for entire civilizations. Twice a year, like clockwork, these powerful seasonal winds reversed direction, creating a natural conveyor belt for trade. From April to September, the southwest monsoon would fill the sails of ships departing East Africa and Arabia, pushing them toward India and beyond. Then, as the seasons shifted, the northeast monsoon would sweep them back home. This wasn't just convenient, it was the heartbeat of commerce, a system so reliable that merchants could plan their voyages years in advance. But this predictability masked a fragile truth. The entire network depended on winds that, as history shows, were far less stable than anyone realized. Ancient mariners didn't just rely on the monsoons, they revered them. Arab sailors called the southwest monsoon the Kharif, carrying ships laden with African gold and ivory to Indian ports. The return trip, timed with the Barif winds, saw holds stuffed with Malabar pepper and Chinese porcelain. Tamil poets described these winds as the breath of the gods, while Chinese Admiral Zheng, his navigational charts meticulously mapped their patterns. The precision was astonishing. A ship leaving Oman in July could reach Kerala in under a month, its arrival timed to the day. But this harmony between humans and nature wasn't foolproof. When the monsoons faltered, the consequences rippled across continents. Climate records locked in coral reefs and lake sediments tell a startling story. Around the 9th century, a period of unusually weak monsoons forced ships to take riskier routes, avoiding shallow ports like Muziris that depended on predictable river flows. Then, in the 13th century, a string of violent monsoon seasons battered the Swahili Coast, collapsing coral-built harbors in Kilwa and Zanzibar. These weren't isolated events, they were symptoms of a shifting climate that turned once bustling ports into maritime graveyards. A harbor that had thrived for centuries might find itself stranded inland as rivers changed course, or drowned beneath storm surges as sea levels inched higher. The real tragedy was how these changes caught civilizations off guard. Unlike wars or plagues, shifting winds left no immediate wreckage, just a slow strangulation of trade. Ports that had grown wealthy feeding empires found themselves starved of ships, their markets emptying as merchants rerouted to deeper harbors or more reliable winds. Take Cambay in northwest India, once a hub for textiles bound for Egypt. Its decline began when weakened monsoons made its shallow gulf impassable for larger Arab dhows. By the time Portuguese explorers arrived, the city was a shadow of itself, its grand bazaars silent. What makes this ancient crisis so relevant today is its eerie parallel to modern trade vulnerabilities. Our global supply chains, much like the monsoon routes, are built on assumptions of stability, predictable shipping lanes, stable climates, and open straits. But history shows how quickly nature can rewrite the rules. The difference: ancient mariners adapted, shifting ports and reinventing routes. In our era of megaports and just-in-time deliveries, could we pivot as gracefully? The monsoons didn't just power the Indian Ocean's golden age, they quietly orchestrated its unraveling, a reminder that even the mightiest empires dance to nature's tune. The Indian Ocean's shimmering waters may look serene today, but for centuries they hid a constant threat: pirates who turned trade routes into battlegrounds. Unlike the swashbuckling outlaws of the Caribbean, these marauders operated on an industrial scale, with fleets that rivaled small navies. Imagine a Gujarati merchant ship laden with Malabar pepper, its crew scanning the horizon for the telltale Latin sails of Omani raiders. Or a Chinese junk, its hull packed with Ming porcelain, suddenly surrounded by swift Bugis prow ships from Sulawesi, their crews armed with curved blades and intimate knowledge of every hidden cove. Piracy wasn't just a hazard, it was a force that reshaped empires, redirecting wealth and determining which ports thrived and which vanished into history. What made these waters so perilous? Geography played a cruel joke. The narrow straits of Malacca, Hormuz, and Bab el-Mandeb were natural choke points, perfect for merchants to converge and equally perfect for ambushes. Pirate kingdoms like the ones based in Madagascar's Isle Sainte Marie or the Lakshadweep Islands operated with near impunity, exploiting the monsoon cycles just as legitimate traders did. When the winds shifted, so did their hunting grounds. A single successful raid could yield riches beyond imagination. In 1722, the infamous English pirate John Taylor captured a Portuguese carrack off Reunion Island, carrying diamonds worth over $800 million in today's money. But the real cost wasn't just lost cargo. It was the slow erosion of trust that had glued the trade network together. Ports responded in wildly different ways, and their fates hinged on those choices. Some, like Aden in Yemen, transformed into fortresses, building massive seawalls and charging merchants premium tariffs for protection, a medieval version of modern insurance. Others, like Calicut on India's west coast, relied on diplomacy, negotiating treaties with pirate leaders that amounted to paid safe passage. But the ports that couldn't adapt paid the price. Take Socotra, the island once known as the Jewel of the Arabian Sea. Its rulers assumed their remote location made them invulnerable, refusing to invest in defenses. By the 16th century, it had become a pirate den, its once busy harbors abandoned by legitimate traders. The most fascinating survival strategy came from the Chola dynasty, who turned the tables on pirates entirely. Instead of just defending their ships, they launched preemptive strikes, using their navy to dismantle pirate bases along the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. Inscriptions from the era boast of kings who cleared the ocean of lawless men. But the real genius was economic. By offering former pirates jobs as licensed privateers, the Cholas co-opted their skills, creating a coast guard centuries before the concept existed. Meanwhile, in East Africa, the Swahili city-states took a different approach. They integrated. Many so-called pirates were actually coastal clans marginalized by the ivory and slave trades, who turned to raiding as protest. Cities like Mombasa began sharing harbor revenues with these groups, effectively buying peace through inclusion. Today's shipping lanes still echo these ancient struggles. The waters off Somalia, where modern pirates hijack oil tankers, mirror the same geographic vulnerabilities as the Straits of Malacca 1,000 years ago. The difference, where medieval merchants adapted by shifting ports or reinventing alliances, our globalized system has fewer alternatives. A single blocked canal or hijacked ship can send shockwaves through supply chains worldwide. Yet history offers a surprising lesson. Piracy often flourished not in lawless voids, but where governance failed. The ports that survived didn't just build taller walls, they built fairer systems, proving that security isn't just about force, but about forging connections even in the face of chaos. The Indian Ocean's ghost ports whisper that the surest defense against predators isn't isolation, but community. In the mid-14th century, a catastrophe swept across the Indian Ocean that would leave its ports as hollow as abandoned seashells, the Black Death. While history books often focus on Europe's devastation, the plague's silent march along maritime trade routes was equally catastrophic. Picture the bustling docks of Aden or Hormuz suddenly gripped by an invisible terror, ships arriving with half their crews dead, markets where merchants collapsed mid-bargain, and once teeming streets now littered with unburied bodies. This wasn't just a health crisis, it was an economic earthquake. The plague tore through the interconnected web of port cities like wildfire, exploiting the very networks that had made them prosperous. Labor shortages crippled dock operations, with skilled shipbuilders, sailors, and artisans vanishing overnight. In Calicut, records speak of pearls rotting in warehouses because no one remained to polish them, while in Malacca, spices piled up on silent wharves with no ships to carry them away. The pandemic's aftermath revealed how fragile these hubs really were. Ports that had thrived for centuries, like Cambay in India or Sohar in Oman, found their trade networks unraveling. With entire merchant families wiped out, financial credit systems collapsed. A single ledger from a Cairo Geniza document describes a Jewish trader's despair as his partners in India and Yemen perished, leaving debts unpaid and contracts void. The scarcity of laborers also shifted power dynamics. In East Africa, surviving workers demanded higher wages, disrupting the established hierarchies that had sustained the slave and ivory trades. Meanwhile, rival ports like Muscat saw opportunity in the chaos, offering safer harbors and stricter quarantine measures to lure what little commerce remained. But the most lasting impact was psychological. The shared trauma of the plague eroded the trust that had glued these distant communities together. Sailors became wary of foreign ports, merchants hesitated to extend credit, and rulers imposed brutal quarantines, some refusing entry to any ship from an infected region for years. The once fluid movement of goods and people calcified into suspicion. This wasn't just a temporary downturn. It rewired the Indian Ocean's commercial DNA. By the time the worst had passed, new powers had risen, old alliances had fractured, and entire ports had slipped into obscurity, their names fading like ink on water-damaged parchment. The parallels to modern global crises are impossible to ignore. Like today's supply chain disruptions, the plague exposed how over-reliance on interconnected systems can become a vulnerability. Ports that diversified their economies, like Aden, which pivoted to local agriculture when long-distance trade stalled, fared better than those dependent on a single commodity. The pandemic also accelerated trends already in motion, much like COVID-19 sped up the shift to digital commerce. As Indian Ocean trade contracted, regional powers like the Ming Dynasty turned inward, focusing on domestic markets, a medieval version of onshoring production. Yet amidst the devastation, innovation emerged. Ship designs evolved to require smaller crews, while merchants developed early forms of insurance to spread risk. What makes this history so haunting is its reminder that pandemics don't just kill people, they kill connections. The Black Death didn't merely empty ports. It severed the threads of cultural exchange that had made the Indian Ocean a cradle of globalization. The Swahili Coast's golden age of architecture, the flow of scientific knowledge between Persia and India, the fusion of culinary traditions from Zanzibar to Java, all these paused, fractured, or vanished entirely. Yet from the wreckage, something unexpected emerged, a resilience forged by necessity. The ports that survived did so by adapting, whether through new technologies, fairer labor practices, or humble diversification. Their lesson, catastrophe, doesn't just erase, it forces reinvention, leaving behind not just scars, but the seeds of whatever comes next. The arrival of Portuguese caravels off the coast of Calicut in 1498 didn't just mark a new chapter in Indian Ocean trade, it shattered an ancient rhythm. For over 1,000 years, the monsoon winds had carried Arab, Indian, and African merchants along familiar routes, governed by unwritten rules of mutual benefit. But the Europeans played by a different script. When Vasco da Gama's cannons roared over the Malabar coast, they weren't just announcing their presence, they were declaring war on the old order. Within decades, Portugal's Estado da India seized choke points from Hormuz to Malacca, transforming bustling free ports into armed fortresses where trade flowed only under the shadow of a cross and a crown. The speed of this takeover masked its fragility. At first glance, European dominance seemed inevitable. Their cannon-laden carracks outgunned traditional dhows, and their centralized command structure outpaced the loose alliances of local rulers. But dig deeper and a different story emerges. The Portuguese didn't conquer through sheer superiority. They exploited divisions. In East Africa, they allied with rebellious Swahili city-states against Kilwa. In India, they played the Zamorin of Calicut against the Sultan of Gujarat. Their real weapon wasn't firepower, it was the ability to turn ancient rivalries into opportunities. Yet resistance flickered everywhere. Take the Omani Imamate, which spent 2 centuries battling Portuguese forts along the Arabian coast, or the Malabari Muslim traders who simply rerouted their spice caravans overland, bypassing blockaded ports entirely. Even nature fought back. Portuguese ships built for Atlantic storms fared poorly in monsoon cyclones, their hulls rotting in tropical waters while nimble Arab dhows slipped past their patrols. The Dutch arrival in the 17th century further complicated the picture. Their VOC, the world's first multinational corporation, didn't just want control, they wanted monopoly, systematically destroying clove trees in the Spice Islands to keep prices high. What's often forgotten is how close this system came to collapse. In 1622, a combined fleet of Ottoman, Gujarati, and Assamese ships nearly drove the Portuguese from Hormuz, a victory that might have rewritten history. Just decades later, the Omani Imam Sultan bin Saif liberated Muscat with a surprise night attack, proving European forts weren't invincible. But the greatest missed opportunity lay in unity. Had the rulers of Calicut, Aden, and Malacca pooled their resources as the Europeans did, the ocean's fate might have been different. Instead, they clung to old rivalries while the new masters of the sea rewrote the rules. The legacy of this power shift wasn't just economic, it was cultural. European ports like Goa and Batavia became grotesque hybrids, where Gothic cathedrals stood beside Hindu temples and Dutch canals cut through Javanese rice fields. Traditional shipbuilding techniques vanished as dockyards were forced to adopt European designs. Even languages mutated, with Portuguese loanwords seeping into Swahili and Malay. Yet through it all, the ocean's spirit endured. Fishermen still read the monsoons as their ancestors had, and in hidden coves from Zanzibar to Sumatra, merchants kept trading just beyond the colonizers' sight, a stubborn reminder that no empire, no matter how mighty, could fully tame the tides of history. The Latin sail wasn't just a piece of cloth catching wind. It was a revolutionary breakthrough that transformed the Indian Ocean into a highway of empires. Unlike the square sails of European ships, which could only harness wind from behind, These triangular marvels allowed Arab and Swahili sailors to tack against the wind, zigzagging across open water with precision. Picture a dhow from Oman slicing through monsoon gusts at impossible angles, its crew adjusting the sail's bamboo spar to exploit every whisper of breeze. This wasn't just engineering, it was poetry in motion, a technology so effective that Portuguese explorers later copied it for their own caravels. Yet by the 19th century, the Latin sail had vanished from most trade routes, replaced by the brute efficiency of European square riggers. The loss wasn't just aesthetic, it erased centuries of accumulated knowledge about wind patterns and currents, severing a tactile connection between sailors and the sea. Equally ingenious was the camel, a deceptively simple navigation tool used by Arab pilots. A small wooden rectangle with a knotted string, it measured the angle of the North Star above the horizon, allowing sailors to determine their latitude with astonishing accuracy. Malay navigators took this further, memorizing the rising and setting points of over 200 stars, their mental maps so precise they could pinpoint islands without charts. The Bugis sailors of Sulawesi even relied on ocean swells, interpreting the way waves reflected off distant landmasses like natural sonar. These weren't just techniques, they were living libraries passed down through generations in chants and rhymes. But when brass sextants and printed charts arrived, these oral traditions crumbled, along with the ports whose economies depended on pilots trained in the old ways. Shipbuilding, too, held secrets modern engineers are only now rediscovering. The M-type vessels of the Swahili Coast, their planks sewn together with coconut fiber, flexed with the waves instead of fighting them, outlasting European hulls in tropical waters. Indian shipwrights waterproofed their dhows with a paste of fish oil and lime, while Chinese junks featured compartmentalized hulls, an ancient form of bulkheading that kept them afloat even after breaches. Yet as steel and steam conquered the seas, these organic innovations were dismissed as primitive. The cost, ports like Surat in India, once famed for its nimble ships, found their docks obsolete, unable to accommodate the leviathans of the industrial age. The greatest loss, though, might be the human networks that sustained these technologies. From the monsoon pilots of Gujarat to the celestial navigators of Yemen, mastery wasn't written in manuals, it lived in guilds and families, taught through apprenticeship and lived experience. When European colonialism disrupted these lineages, centuries of wisdom evaporated in a generation. Today, researchers comb through medieval Arabic texts and Javanese palm leaf manuscripts, struggling to reconstruct what was once common knowledge. The irony is palpable. In our age of GPS and container ships, we're only beginning to grasp the sophistication of what was tossed aside. What makes these forgotten innovations so vital isn't just their historical charm, it's their unexpected relevance. As modern shipping grapples with rising fuel costs and environmental crises, engineers are revisiting ancient solutions. The Latin sail's efficiency inspires modern wind propulsion systems, while the M-type's flexible design informs earthquake-resistant architecture. Even the camel's simplicity has found new life in backup navigation courses for sailors. The ghosts of these technologies whisper a warning: progress isn't always linear, and sometimes the future hides in the past. The ports that thrived longest were those that balanced adaptation with tradition, a lesson as urgent now as it was 1,000 years ago. The Silk Road's camel caravans may have captured the world's imagination, but for centuries, the Indian Ocean's maritime routes moved more silk, spices, and ideas than any overland path. So why does history remember one and forget the other? The answer lies in the way power shifts rewrite the past. When the Mongols unified Eurasia in the 13th century, their Pax Mongolica made overland travel safer and faster, luring merchants away from the sea. Suddenly, a trader could transport Persian carpets from Tabriz to Beijing without unloading them, while maritime voyages still required multiple stops and middlemen. The rise of new commodities like gunpowder and paper, lighter and more profitable to carry by land, sealed the shift. Silk Road cities like Samarkand thrived as maritime ports faded into footnotes. Yet politics played an even greater role. While the Silk Road flourished under centralized empires like the Yuan dynasty, the Indian Ocean's strength had always been its decentralized nature, a network of independent ports and merchant guilds. When European colonizers arrived, they didn't just dominate trade, they rewrote its history. Portuguese chroniclers glorified their discoveries, downplaying the sophisticated networks they disrupted. Dutch maps erased African and Arab port names, replacing them with European settlements. By the 19th century, textbooks framed the Indian Ocean as a blank space, civilized by colonialism, its millennia of pre-European commerce reduced to a prelude. The final blow came from the very thing that once made maritime trade revolutionary, its adaptability. Unlike the Silk Road's fixed caravan stops, ocean routes could vanish without a trace. When ports like Muziris silted up or Piracy was abandoned, traders simply rerouted, leaving no ruins to excavate. Overland caravanserais, built of stone in deserts where nothing decays, became romantic ruins for archaeologists. Meanwhile, wooden docks rotted, coral ports crumbled into the sea, and monsoon winds scattered the records of centuries. The ocean didn't just hide its past, it dissolved it. But the most insidious reason for this historical amnesia, the stories we choose to tell. The Silk Road fits a comforting narrative of East meeting West, of Marco Polo's adventures and camel trains crossing dunes. The Indian Ocean story is messier, a tapestry of African fishermen, Malay pilots, Gujarati bankers, and Omani shipwrights whose collaborations don't align with nationalist histories. Rediscovering these lost ports isn't just about correcting the record. It's about reclaiming a vision of globalization that wasn't imposed by empires, but woven by countless hands across waves and monsoons. The tides that erased these harbors couldn't wash away their truth. The world was connected long before we called it globalized, and the proof lies not in desert sands, but beneath the shifting blue. Centuries before climate change became a global crisis, the Indian Ocean's ports were already battling rising tides and losing. Take the ancient city of Puhar, once a thriving Chola port at the mouth of the Kaveri River. Tamil poems from 2,000 years ago describe its bustling docks where ships unloaded horses from Arabia and sacks of black pepper piled high as hills. Today, fishermen diving offshore still bring up Roman coins and Chinese ceramics from ruins submerged under 15 feet of water. This wasn't an isolated tragedy. From India's Lothal, a Harappan port swallowed by the sea around 1900 BC, to medieval Siraf in Persia, whose harbor silted up as river patterns shifted, history is littered with drowned trading hubs. The culprit, a deadly mix of natural cycles and human short-sightedness. The science behind these disappearances reads like a detective story. Core samples from sediment layers near vanished ports reveal sudden spikes in saltwater intrusion, evidence of storm surges or gradual sea level rise. At Berenice Troglodytica, a Red Sea port that served Ptolemaic Egypt, archaeologists found ship timbers buried under 6 feet of sand, preserved like time capsules from the moment the harbor became unusable. But here's what's chilling: many of these ports didn't just drown, they were abandoned because their freshwater sources turned brackish. Wells in Qusayr al-Qadim, another Egyptian port, show layers where sweet water gave way to salt, a death sentence for any settlement. What's often overlooked is how these environmental shifts triggered economic domino effects. When the port of Mantai in Sri Lanka sank beneath the waves in the 10th century, it didn't just erase a harbor, it collapsed the entire regional pearl trade. The Maldives' ancient capital, Malé, relocated twice due to erosion, disrupting the cowrie shell currency that once circulated from Africa to China. Even minor changes could be catastrophic. When the mouth of the Indus River shifted westward around 1300 CE, it stranded the port of Dabal, forcing merchants to reroute through less secure harbors. Pirates soon infested the abandoned coastline, proving that environmental change doesn't just reshape maps, it rewrites power dynamics. Today's coastal megacities face eerily similar threats, but with higher stakes. Mumbai, built over 7 sunken islands, sinks 2 millimeters annually while seas rise faster. Alexandria, successor to those ancient Egyptian ports, could see 60% of its population displaced by flooding by 2100. Yet the past also offers glimmers of hope. Some medieval ports adapted ingeniously. Venice's ancestors fled to lagoon islands as mainland waters rose, while the Bengalis of Sonargaon built floating markets that rose with monsoon floods. The lesson isn't just about vulnerability, it's about reinvention. When the ocean reclaims, the choice isn't just retreat or resist, but whether we'll learn from the ghosts of ports past or repeat their fate. Beneath the turquoise waters of the Indian Ocean, archaeologists are uncovering a lost world, one artifact at a time. Off the coast of Tamil Nadu, divers recently surfaced with a fist-sized chunk of corroded metal that turned out to be a Roman coin minted during Emperor Augustus' reign, proof that Mediterranean traders reached India 2,000 years ago. Nearby, sonar scans revealed the outline of a submerged wharf, its wooden pilings preserved like fossils in the seabed. These aren't isolated finds. From Oman to Zanzibar, teams are stitching together the fragments of vanished ports using everything from ancient texts to satellite thermal imaging that detects buried stone structures invisible to the naked eye. The real breakthroughs come when these puzzle pieces connect. Take the discovery of a 9th century shipwreck near Belitung Island. Its cargo held 60,000 Chinese Tang Dynasty ceramics, Persian glassware, and even a rare blue and white dish featuring a peacock motif identical to fragments found in Kenya. This single wreck proved direct trade between China and Africa existed centuries earlier than historians believed. Similarly, when researchers matched pollen samples from Madagascar's soil with plants native to Southeast Asia, they traced the invisible trail of Austronesian sailors who crossed the ocean 1,000 years before Europeans arrived. Yet for every answered question, these excavations pose new mysteries. Why did the sophisticated port of Arakkaimdu in India, a hub for Roman trade, suddenly abandon its signature rouleted pottery style in the 3rd century? What caused the thick layer of ash covering the warehouses of Pattanam, another ancient Kerala port? Some clues defy explanation, like the perfectly spherical stone anchors found near Socotra, their purpose still debated. The ocean guards its secrets closely. Even well-preserved sites face irreversible damage from coral growth, strong currents, and looters who sell artifacts on the black market before scholars can study them. Technology is becoming archaeology's greatest ally. LiDAR scans over Cambodia's Mekong Delta recently revealed an extensive canal system linking what was once a maritime power called Funan to inland cities. In the Red Sea, underwater robots mapped the submerged ruins of Baroness Troglodytica, uncovering perfectly preserved ropes and ship timbers that reveal ancient Egyptian shipbuilding techniques. Perhaps most astonishing are the digital reconstructions emerging from these efforts, virtual models that let us walk through the bustling docks of Muziris or see the grand coral palaces of Kilwa in their original splendor. What makes these discoveries so transformative isn't just rewriting dates on a timeline, it's upending assumptions about how the ancient world functioned. The sheer volume of African ivory found in Sri Lankan ports suggests trade networks were far more extensive than texts indicated. The discovery of pepper residue in Roman-era Egyptian jars proves spices traveled faster and farther than previously thought. Even humble objects tell revolutionary stories. Fish bones found in Oman's ports matched species from Indonesia, suggesting fishermen shared knowledge across 12,000 kilometers of ocean. The hunt for these lost ports is far from academic. It's a race against time. Rising sea levels, coastal erosion, and industrial development threaten to erase these fragile sites forever. Every monsoon season washes away layers of sediment that might hold clues, while dynamite fishing destroys coral that's preserved wood and ceramics for centuries. Yet with each salvaged artifact, we reclaim a piece of humanity's shared heritage, not as isolated civilizations, but as participants in a vast, interconnected world that mirrors our own. The Indian Ocean's silent ruins remind us that globalization isn't a modern invention, it's an ancient rhythm we're only beginning to hear again. Among the coconut groves and fishing villages that now dot the coastlines where great ports once stood, the past lingers not in textbooks, but in stories whispered across generations. In Kerala, elders still speak of the Muziris nights, when ghostly lanterns flicker over the Periyar River, said to be the spirits of Roman merchants forever waiting for ships that will never return. On Zanzibar's beaches, children are warned not to pick up strangely shaped stones at low tide, lest they disturb the cursed sapphires of Rhapta, lost when the sea swallowed the city. These aren't just campfire tales, they're living memory encoded in myth. What's fascinating is how often these legends hold kernels of truth. Take the Swahili story of the golden crocodile of Kilwa, a mythical beast said to guard sunken treasures in the harbor. When archaeologists recently discovered gold coins embedded in fossilized crocodile bones nearby, the fable suddenly seemed less fantasy than fractured history. Similarly, Tamil fishermen's accounts of blackened stones near Puhar led researchers to the submerged remains of warehouses destroyed by an ancient tsunami, their charcoal layers perfectly preserved underwater. The line between folklore and fact blurs where written records fade, making oral traditions unexpectedly vital clues. Some myths serve as cautionary tales about the port's downfalls. In Gujarat, the ghost town of Lothal is said to be haunted by a wailing ship without sailors, echoing local memories of the Harapan port's abrupt abandonment after rising seas turned freshwater sources salty. On Sumatra, the Batak people recount how the camphor port of Baras was punished by the gods for its greed, with earthquakes burying its wealth, a moral fable that aligns with geological evidence of sudden subsidence. Even the Arabian Nights tale of Sinbad's cursed voyage likely draws on real hazards like the maelstroms near Socotra that swallowed medieval dhows. But perhaps the most poignant legends are those that preserve what official histories erased. The Makonde people of Tanzania speak of the strangers who came by sea with fire sticks, preserving oral accounts of Portuguese cannons centuries before colonial archives acknowledged their violence. In Java, puppet theatre retells the Ramayana with Hanuman wearing a sailor's headscarf, a subtle nod to the Indian merchants who brought the epic to Southeast Asia. These stories do more than entertain. They safeguard marginalized narratives against the selective memory of empires. Decoding these myths requires listening beyond their surface. When Sri Lankan fishermen describe moonlight turning the waves to milk near Mantai's ruins, they're likely recalling the harbor's famed pearl divers who worked by lunar tides. The Bugis sailors' spirit compasses, said to point to lost cities, probably encoded real navigational knowledge about magnetic anomalies near vanished ports. Even fantastical elements like Zanzibar's claim that buried cannons growl during storms may stem from acoustic phenomena in hollow ruins. The endurance of these stories speaks to something profound. Humans will weave narratives to explain absence, to mourn what's vanished, and to warn against repeating mistakes. As the last elders who heard these tales firsthand pass away, ethnographers race to document them before they dissolve like the ports they commemorate. But in a way, these legends have already won. They've outlasted stone walls and royal decrees, proving that memory floats where empires sink. The next time you hear a folktale about drowned cities or phantom markets, listen closely. You might just catch an echo of waves lapping against forgotten docks and the voices of those who still remember. The spices that sailed across the Indian Ocean didn't just flavor food, they flavored history. A single shipload of Malabar pepper could bankroll an entire kingdom, while cloves from Zanzibar and cinnamon from Sri Lanka became currencies more reliable than gold. The sheer scale of this trade rewrote economies. In Rome, pepper was so precious it was stored alongside jewels in the imperial treasury, and medieval European kings used nutmeg as collateral for loans. But behind these dazzling fortunes lay a darker truth. The Indian Ocean wasn't just a highway for goods, it was a conveyor belt for human suffering. The same monsoon winds that carried silk and sandal would also propelled slave ships from East Africa to Arabian plantations, and the docks where spices were weighed often doubled as markets where people were bought and sold. Consider the paradox of Gujarat's textile boom. The region's cotton, dyed with indigo from Yemen and printed with techniques borrowed from Indonesia, clothed everyone from Egyptian sultans to Javanese nobles. Artisans in Cambay could weave a fabric so fine it passed through a ring, yet many worked in conditions indistinguishable from bondage. Debt chains stretched from weavers to moneylenders to shipowners, creating a system where profit flowed upward while risk crushed those at the bottom. Even the gems that glittered in royal courts, rubies from Burma, sapphires from Ceylon, often came from mines where laborers toiled in pits under the lash. The brilliance of this commerce was built on backs bent by exploitation, yet to dismiss the era as purely exploitative misses its transformative power. The Indian Ocean trade birthed the first true multinational corporations like the Karami merchants of Cairo, who operated branches from Spain to Sumatra. It pioneered financial instruments still used today. The Arabic word sak, meaning written contract, gave us check, while Indian hundi bills functioned as early letters of credit. In Calicut, Hindu merchants developed profit-sharing models with Arab traders that resembled modern joint ventures. The port cities became crucibles of innovation where Persian accounting met Chinese abacuses and African market traditions, creating frameworks that underpin global commerce even now. The question isn't whether this system was heroic or horrific, it was both. The same networks that spread Buddhism and Islam also trafficked enslaved people. The ports that welcomed diverse cultures also concentrated wealth in ways that echo today's inequality. Perhaps the lesson lies in the choices we make when remembering. Do we glorify the era as a golden age of globalization, or reduce it to a cautionary tale? The truth resists simplicity. In Mombasa's old town, descendants of Omani merchants still brew coffee with cardamom from ancestral recipes, while in Kerala, fishing nets woven from Portuguese-era techniques drape the shore. The legacy isn't just in ledgers or ledgers of suffering, it's in the living, messy present, where the ocean's gifts and scars still shape who we are. History rarely offers clean endings, only currents that carry us forward, asking what we'll do with their momentum. The docks of the Indian Ocean didn't just exchange spices and silks, they traded the very building blocks of culture. Picture a 9th century Javanese king listening to a Persian merchant recite verses from the Quran, his curiosity sparking a spiritual transformation that would ripple across Southeast Asia. Or a Swahili poet in 14th century killed while weaving Sanskrit loanwords into his verses, blending the lyrical cadence of India with the rhythms of Bantu speech. This wasn't mere commerce, it was a silent revolution where every ship carried not just cargo, but the seeds of new worldviews. Islam's journey along these trade routes defies simple narratives. Unlike conquests led by armies, its spread was a quieter phenomenon, a tapestry woven by merchants, scholars, and mystics. In Malacca, Sufi traders from Gujarat introduced the faith through music and poetry, their devotional qawwalis echoing in bamboo prayer halls. By the time Marco Polo visited Sumatra in the 13th century, he found sultans ruling ports where the call to prayer mingled with the scent of nutmeg. The religion adapted as it traveled. In Java, Wayang Kulit shadow puppets told stories of the prophet alongside Hindu epics, while Zanzibar's mosques incorporated choral arches reminiscent of Persian design. The ocean didn't just transport Islam, it reinvented it, creating hybrid traditions that still thrive from Comoros to Mindanao. Languages, too, melted into one another like wax under the tropical sun. Swahili, born on the East African coast, absorbed Arabic script and Persian nautical terms while keeping its Bantu soul. A single sentence might reference Portuguese, mesa for table, Hindi, chai for tea, and amane, gale for expensive, a linguistic mosaic reflecting centuries of dockyard negotiations. Even scripts transformed. The Malay language, once written in Pallava script from South India, switched to Jawi, an Arabic alphabet adapted with extra letters for local sounds. These weren't corruptions, but creative acts of survival, proving that communication thrives not in purity, but in adaptation. Religions and tongues weren't the only travelers. Architectural ideas sailed with the monsoons, blending into startling new forms. The minarets of Lamu in Kenya, tapered like inverted lotus buds, reveal an Indian aesthetic filtered through Arab builders. In Cambodia's Angkor region, archaeologists found 9th century pottery inscribed with Hebrew prayers, likely left by Jewish traders from Yemen who paused on their way to China. Even food became a passport. Coconut milk-based curries migrated from Kerala to Malaysia, while Yemeni coffee rituals took root in Ethiopian highlands, carried by merchants who knew flavor could bridge divides. The most enduring legacy of this exchange lies in its intimacy. Unlike empires that imposed culture by decree, the ocean's connections grew organically, through marriages between foreign traders and local families, through children raised speaking their mother's tongue and their father's prayers. In Sri Lanka, Muslim communities still trace ancestry to Arab sailors who wed Tamil women, their matrilineal inheritance customs preserving a fusion older than colonialism. On the Laccadive Islands, fishermen chant sea shanties in a dialect mixing Malayalam, Arabic, and Portuguese, each verse a palimpsest of forgotten encounters. These cultural currents remind us that the true treasures of the Indian Ocean weren't just the silks and spices that fueled kingdoms, but the intangible gifts that outlasted them. A prayer carried on the wind, a word borrowed and made new, a story retold until it belonged to everyone. The ports may have crumbled, but their whispers linger in the call to prayer at a Jakarta mosque, in the Swahili proverbs traded in Dar es Salaam's markets, and in the faces of children who still bear the features of 1,000 distant shores. Standing on the quiet shoreline of Pattanam in Kerala, where fishermen now mend their nets over layers of buried Roman amphorae, it's hard to imagine this was once the pulsating heart of Muziris. The air smells of salt and drying fish, not the heady mix of sandalwood and spices that would have drifted from dockside warehouses 2,000 years ago. Nearby, a lone signboard marks an archaeological pit where workers unearthed a brick wharf, now just a few crumbling rows protruding from the earth like broken teeth. This is the fate of most ghost ports, not dramatic ruins but subtle scars on the landscape, visible only to those who know where to look, yet some vanished cities cling stubbornly to memory. In Zanzibar's stone town, the scent of cloves still lingers in the labyrinthine alleys, and shopkeepers display antique Omani chests that once held ivory and gold dust. The difference between remembrance and oblivion often hinges on what was left behind. Ports like Kilwa Kisiwani in Tanzania left towering coral mosques that couldn't be ignored, their arches framing the sky even as the ocean gnawed at their foundations. Others, like Baras in Sumatra, vanished so completely that their very existence was debated until archaeologists matched descriptions in medieval Arab texts to camphor-stained soil deep in the jungle. The sea guards its secrets jealously. At low tide near the Tanzanian village of Chola, children skip over moss-covered stones that were once the foundations of a 13th century Swahili port. Locals call them the bones of the old city, though few remember its name was once a whisper across the Indian Ocean. Contrast this with Gujarat's Lothal, where the Harappan port's geometric docks, meticulously aligned with ancient tides, are now a museum centerpiece. Preservation isn't just about scale, it's about stories. Lothal survived in collective memory because its engineering marvels begged to be explained, while Chola's ruins became just another part of the shoreline. What's haunting is how quickly the present overwrites the past. In Muscat's bustling Matra Sauk, vendors hawk frankincense under neon lights, oblivious to the fact their stalls sit atop the ruins of Sohar, a port so wealthy it was said to have silver roofs. Meanwhile, on Malaysia's Kedah coast, rice paddies stretch where merchant ships once anchored, their only memorial a folk song about the golden boats that never returned. The difference between erasure and endurance often comes down to who tells the story. Portuguese colonizers plastered their history over Swahili city walls, while independent Oman meticulously restored its maritime heritage in places like Sur, where how builders still craft ships using techniques from the age of sail. Perhaps the most poignant sights are those caught between worlds. In Egypt's Berenice Troglodytica, the bleached ribs of ship timbers poke from the sand beside a military base, off limits to visitors. And in India's Poompuhar, local fishermen point to patches of unnaturally calm water, the drowned streets of the Chola port, they say, where spirits still light lamps during monsoon storms. These places exist in a liminal space, neither fully remembered nor entirely forgotten. Their stories kept alive not in textbooks but in the rituals of daily life. A prayer muttered over a seaside grave, a recipe passed down with the note, "This is how the Persian traders liked it." The ghost ports challenge our assumptions about what endures. Grandeur isn't enough. Rhapta's ivory towers are lost while a humble Maldivian fishing atoll preserves ancient coral stone mosques. Stone isn't always stronger than story. Witness how Jeddah's coral houses, inscribed with merchants' names, outlasted Siraf's mighty reservoirs. And sometimes the most powerful legacy isn't a ruin at all, but an absence that aches. Walk the empty beaches where Muziris once stood, and you'll understand the ocean doesn't just erase, it whispers in the gaps between waves that every vanished port was once someone's whole world. Today's sprawling megaports, with their towering cranes and labyrinthine container yards, might seem worlds apart from the wooden docks of ancient Muziris or Kilwa. But look closer and the echoes are uncanny. The port of Singapore, the busiest transshipment hub on Earth, occupies the same strategic choke point as medieval Malacca did, controlling access between the Indian and Pacific Oceans. Dubai's Jebel Ali, a desert-made harbor, mirrors ancient Siraf's artificial waterways carved into inhospitable coastlines. Even the language of global trade hasn't changed much. Entrepot, a term modern economists use for redistribution hubs like Rotterdam, comes directly from the French word for warehouse, the same role Rhapta and Piracy played 2,000 years ago. The fundamental dance of geography, supply, and demand remains unchanged. Yet beneath these surface similarities lies a revolution. Where ancient mariners waited months for monsoon winds, modern container ships follow algorithms predicting optimal routes down to the minute. The Karami merchants of Cairo once tracked deals on parchment. Today, blockchain verifies spice shipments from Kerala to Chicago before the crates even leave the dock. The most profound shift, physical goods now share the stage with data. A single submarine cable carries more value in digital transactions than a year's worth of medieval spice caravans. This isn't just evolution, it's a redefinition of what trade even means. The irony is that our hyper-connected world faces vulnerabilities the ancients never imagined. When the Ever Given blocked the Suez Canal in 2021, it triggered delays eerily reminiscent of when Portuguese warships choked Malacca Straits in the 16th century. But unlike medieval merchants who could reroute through Sunda or Aceh, modern supply chains have fewer alternatives. The concentration of trade through megaports like Shanghai and Los Angeles creates bottlenecks far more fragile than the decentralized networks of the past. A cyber attack on a single port's logistics software could cascade into global chaos, a threat no monsoon or pirate fleet ever posed. Ancient ports offer unexpected lessons for this new era. Take the Swahili city-states, which thrived by specializing Kilwa in gold, Mombasa in ivory, Zanzibar in cloves. Similarly, modern hubs like Shenzhen dominate electronics while Houston rules energy exports. But here's where history warns us: over-specialization breeds fragility. When the Portuguese disrupted Kilwa's gold trade, the city never recovered. Today, ports reliant on single commodities or industries risk the same fate as automation reshapes labor and 3D printing localizes manufacturing. The spice routes didn't vanish because spices lost value, they faded because the system around them changed. Perhaps the most startling parallel is cultural. Just as Gujarati bankers and Omani sailors once forged shared languages and customs, today's global trade relies on a patchwork of hybrid systems, English as the lingua franca of shipping, standardized container sizes, and universal barcodes. Yet beneath this uniformity, local adaptations persist. Chinese e-commerce giants like Alibaba have reinvented the ancient Hawala system with digital escrow payments, while East African mobile money platforms echo the trust-based credit networks of medieval Swahili merchants. The tools have changed, but the human instinct to bridge differences remains. What's truly disappearing isn't the concept of ports, but their visibility. Ancient harbors were vibrant public spaces where sailors, traders, and storytellers mingled. Modern equivalents are often sterile, automated zones where robots stack containers and drones inspect cargo. The romance of trade, the chance encounters that spread Buddhism along the Malabar coast or brought Venetian glass to Japanese shrines, now happens in server farms and encrypted chat rooms. Whether this is progress depends on what we value: efficiency or serendipity, speed or the human touch. The Indian Ocean's ghost ports whisper a final caution. Their ruins remind us that no trade system, no matter how dominant, lasts forever. Climate change threatens modern ports with rising seas, just as silt choked Muziris. Geopolitics could fracture supply chains as abruptly as the Black Death shattered medieval networks. And somewhere in a garage or lab, the next disruption, perhaps AI-driven autonomous ships or orbital trade platforms, is brewing. The lesson isn't to resist change, but to build resilience the way the ancients did, through diversity, adaptability, and remembering that commerce at its heart isn't about goods or data, but the people who move them. The ocean's lost harbors didn't fail because they stopped trading. They vanished when they forgot how to evolve. Preserving the remnants of the Indian Ocean's lost ports isn't just about studying history. It's a high-stakes battle against looters, bureaucracy, and the relentless sea. Imagine divers uncovering a centuries-old shipwreck off the coast of Sri Lanka, only to find it stripped bare by treasure hunters wielding underwater metal detectors. Or archaeologists in Oman discovering a medieval harbor's foundations, just as a coastal construction project begins bulldozing the site. These aren't hypothetical scenarios, they're daily realities in maritime archaeology, where every artifact saved is a small miracle. The challenges start with the ocean itself. Saltwater corrodes metal, currents scatter delicate pottery, and shifting sands bury ruins deeper each year. Compare this to land-based sites like Pompeii, where volcanic ash preserved entire streetscapes. Underwater, even wood decays faster, leaving behind only the faintest traces. At the ancient port of Qusayr al-Qadim on Egypt's Red Sea coast, archaeologists found papyrus receipts from Roman traders, miraculously preserved in oxygen-starved mud, but disintegrating the moment they were exposed to air. Saving such fragile evidence requires cutting-edge technology, like 3D photogrammetry, to digitally capture artifacts before they're disturbed. Yet technology alone can't stop the human threats. In war-torn Somalia, fishermen turned. Looters pillaged shipwrecks for Chinese porcelain to sell on the black market, often destroying context that's priceless to researchers. A single intact Ming Dynasty bowl might fetch thousands, but its true value lies in what it reveals about trade routes and cultural exchange. Meanwhile, in politically stable regions, red tape strangles progress. Off India's Konkan coast, a team spent 5 years waiting for permits to document a Chola-era shipwreck, only to find it had been dynamited by locals harvesting scrap metal. Funding is another silent crisis. Excavating underwater sites costs 10 times more than land digs, requiring specialized equipment, dive teams, and conservation labs. When Tunisia's Madia shipwreck was discovered in the early 20th century, archaeologists could only afford to recover a fraction of its Greek statues and bronzes. Today, those remaining artifacts are slowly dissolving in the acidic seabed, their stories lost because preserving them simply isn't prioritized. Even UNESCO's 2001 Convention on Underwater Cultural Heritage, which protects wrecks over 100 years old, lacks enforcement teeth, leaving sites vulnerable to salvage companies masquerading as archaeologists. But why does this race against time matter? Because these sunken cities and shipwrecks are archives of humanity's first experiments with globalization. The Belitung wreck's cargo of Tang Dynasty treasures proved direct China-Arab trade existed centuries earlier than textbooks claimed. A single shard of Indian rouleted ware found in Vietnam rewrote our understanding of ancient maritime networks. Every artifact is a puzzle piece in understanding how cultures connected long before airplanes or the internet. The stakes go beyond academia. For coastal communities from Zanzibar to Kerala, these sites are living heritage, proof their ancestors weren't passive bystanders to history, but its architects. When Kilwa Kisiwani's ruins were named a UNESCO World Heritage Site, it wasn't just about preservation. It was an affirmation of Swahili civilization's sophistication. Similarly, Tamil fishermen who guide archaeologists to Pumpuhar's submerged ruins aren't just helping science, they're reclaiming their own narrative from colonial-era dismissals of pre-European maritime achievement. Hope flickers in unexpected places. Citizen scientists in Indonesia report looted artifacts via social media, while Zanzibar's youth dive clubs monitor wreck sites for damage. New tools like AI-powered sonar can map entire seabeds in days, revealing ruins invisible to human eyes. Perhaps the greatest lesson from these efforts is that saving the past isn't about freezing it in time. It's about ensuring its stories keep breathing, adapting, and speaking to generations who'll never walk those vanished docks, but who still sail in their wake. The ruins of these once great ports tell conflicting stories. Some bear the unmistakable scars of nature's fury, while others whisper of human miscalculation. Take Puhar, the ancient Chola harbor now lying beneath the waves off India's coast. Tamil poems describe a catastrophic flood that swallowed the city whole, and geologists have found tsunami deposits dating to the same era. Yet just a few centuries later, the same region's port of Mamallapuram survived nearly identical storms. The difference, Puhar's rulers had built their docks atop unstable silt, while Mamallapuram's engineers anchored theirs to bedrock. Nature delivered the blow, but human choices determined the outcome. Then there's the slow-motion tragedy of Siraf in Persia. Earthquakes rattled its foundations, but what doomed it was the stubborn refusal to adapt. As rival ports like Hormuz embraced deeper-hulled Arab ships, Seraf's merchants kept dredging their silt-clogged harbor, a costly, futile battle against shifting currents. Tax records show they even levied special fees to fund the effort, draining coffers that could have built new docks elsewhere. By the time they admitted defeat, the trade routes had moved on. Here, the disaster wasn't the quakes, it was the arrogance of believing the ocean would bend to human will. Contrast this with the mysterious fall of Baras, Sumatra's camphor capital. Core samples reveal its river suddenly changed course, stranding the port inland. But dig deeper and another culprit emerges, overharvesting. The very trees that made Baras rich, slow-growing dry balanaps were felled faster than they could regrow. By the time Chinese chemists invented synthetic camphor, Baras had already gutted its own golden goose. The lesson echoes modern deforestation crises. Ecosystems can only bear so much strain before they snap back. Historians still spar over Kilwa's collapse. Yes, Portuguese cannons shattered its peace in 1505, but the cracks were already there. Excavations show the elite had hoarded ivory and gold in palace vaults while the docks crumbled. When crisis came, there was no reserve to rebuild. Meanwhile, Zanzibar, just 200 miles north, weathered the same storms by reinvesting trade wealth into coral block fortifications. Both faced identical threats, only one prioritized collective survival over short-term gain. Perhaps the starkest warning comes from the Maldives' ancient capital, Malé. Rising seas forced it to relocate twice, yet its rulers kept rebuilding in harm's way until a 14th century tsunami erased it for good. Today, its ruins lie beneath a modern airport, a literal paving over of past mistakes. The pattern is hauntingly familiar, communities doubling down on risky ground, whether it's Venice's sinking palazzos or Miami's flood-prone condos. These stories defy simple binaries. Ports didn't fall solely to earthquakes or greed, but to the interplay of both. A monsoon might wreck a harbor, but corruption could divert relief funds. Pirates might raid a trade route, but poor diplomacy left allies unwilling to help. The Indian Ocean's ghosts remind us that resilience isn't about avoiding disasters, it's about building societies flexible enough to endure them. When the next great port vanishes, whether from rising tides or reckless speculation, its epitaph won't blame nature or human error alone, but the deadly dance between them. In the shadow of Oman's futuristic Muscat skyline, a centuries-old dhow glides across the harbor, its sails catching the wind just as they did when this coast was the heartbeat of Indian Ocean trade. The vessel isn't a relic, it's part of a bold experiment. Oman's government has spent millions resurrecting traditional shipbuilding techniques, training a new generation of craftsmen to construct dhows using the same methods that once connected Sohar to Zanzibar. It's more than nostalgia, it's a strategic reclaiming of identity. By restoring these tangible links to their maritime past, nations like Oman and India aren't just preserving history, they're rewriting their place in a globalized world. India's Muziris Heritage Project offers a striking case study. Along Kerala's backwaters, archaeologists have unearthed Roman coins and Chinese pottery, but the real transformation is happening above ground. Local fishermen now double as tour guides, narrating the saga of their ancestors who traded pepper with Caesar's Rome. A once sleepy village has become a living museum, with traditional spice markets recreated using centuries-old blueprints. The economic impact is undeniable. Tourist arrivals have surged by over 300%, injecting life into rural communities. Yet the deeper value lies in cultural reclamation. For generations, colonial narratives downplayed India's pre-European maritime prowess. Now, schoolchildren watch as divers bring up proof of their forebears' global connections. Critics argue these efforts risk sanitizing history. Zanzibar's stone town, with its restored Arab mansions, sometimes feels more like a film set than a lived-in space. Luxury hotels occupy buildings where enslaved people once toiled, their stories reduced to placards beside infinity pools. The challenge is balancing celebration with honesty. In Gujarat, the Lothal Maritime Museum tackles this head-on, pairing exhibits on Harappan shipbuilding with frank discussions about how climate change drowned the port, an implicit warning for today's coastal cities. The best projects don't just glorify the past, they mine it for lessons. The psychological impact is equally profound. In Sur, Oman, young engineers who once dreamed of oil careers now compete for apprenticeships at dhow yards, blending ancestral knowledge with 3D modeling software. Along India's Coromandel coast, Tamil filmmakers are rediscovering the Chola dynasty's naval conquests, producing epics that rival Hollywood spectacles funded by crowdsourcing from diaspora communities hungry for roots. This isn't just about tourism revenue, it's about filling what historian Sanjeev Sanyal calls the vacuum of civilizational memory, the gap left when colonial education severed ties to pre-colonial achievement. Yet the revival faces real-world tests. Traditional dhow routes between Oman and India, relaunched with great fanfare, now battle skyrocketing insurance costs and container ship traffic. Handwoven sails tear in storms that fiberglass hulls weather easily. The question isn't whether the past can inspire, it's whether modern systems can accommodate its revival. Some solutions are emerging. Zanzibar's Spice Trail tours partner with fair trade cooperatives, ensuring clove farmers profit alongside hoteliers. Kerala's government subsidizes homestays in historic fishermen's houses, preventing gentrification. The most compelling successes merge old and new. In Calicut, once the pepper capital of the medieval world, chefs now craft fusion menus pairing ancient recipes with molecular gastronomy. Black pepper foam atop locally caught lobster, a nod to the spice that built empires. Muscat's Maritime History Gallery uses holograms to simulate 11th century trade negotiations, letting visitors barter virtual frankincense. These projects thrive because they don't treat heritage as a static exhibit, but as a living toolkit for innovation. Perhaps the greatest lesson from these revived ports is that identity isn't found in ruins, it's forged by how we carry them forward. When Omani sailors navigate by stars alongside GPS, or Indian weavers incorporate Phoenician patterns into smart fabrics, they're not resurrecting ghosts. They're proving that the Indian Ocean's forgotten highways still have destinations worth reaching, not just in history books, but in the stories we choose to live today. The lost ports of the Indian Ocean teach us something profound. Civilizations, like tides, have rhythms. They rise, they crest, and sometimes they vanish without a trace. But beneath the silence of abandoned docks and sunken wharves, there's a pulse that still beats. These ports weren't just waypoints for spices and silk. They were laboratories of human connection, where cultures collided and reshaped each other in ways that echo across centuries. When we walk the beaches where Muziris once thrived or sift through the soil of Kilwa's ruined palaces, we're not just uncovering artifacts. We're holding fragments of a world that knew how to thrive across vast distances long before the word globalization existed. There's a haunting relevance to their stories today. The same forces that felled these hubs, climate shifts, economic upheaval, the arrogance of assuming trade routes would last forever, are the very challenges we face now. The difference: we have their ghosts as guides. The merchants of Seraf didn't foresee their harbor silting up, just as the rulers of Piracy couldn't imagine their camphor trees running out. But we can look back and see the warning signs they missed. The lesson isn't that empires fall. It's that resilience isn't about permanence, but adaptability. The ports that endured longest weren't the wealthiest or most powerful. They were the ones that diversified, that listened to the winds and shifted course before the storm hit. What's equally striking is how these lost ports defy the myth of isolation. For too long, history framed Africa, Asia, and the Middle East as separate worlds until Europeans connected them. But the Indian Ocean's ruins scream otherwise. A single shipwreck near Indonesia held African ivory, Persian glass, and Chinese ceramics, a snapshot of a globe that was already intertwined. The Swahili Coast's blended language, the Tamil inscriptions in Vietnamese temples, the Omani coins found in Philippine jungles, all whisper the same truth. The desire to reach across horizons is ancient, universal, and deeply human. So what do we do with these lessons? For starters, we listen. When modern ports like Mumbai or Miami face rising seas, they're not just battling nature, they're reliving the choices that doomed Lothal or Malay. When trade wars fracture supply chains, we're replaying the mistakes of ports that bet everything on a single commodity. But there's hope, too. The Indian Ocean's legacy isn't just collapse, it's reinvention. The Gujarati merchants who pivoted from spices to textiles, the Swahili cities that rebuilt after Portuguese raids, they prove that decline isn't destiny. As the waves keep carving coastlines and new empires rise, these ghost ports challenge us to ask, what will future archaeologists say about our harbors? Will they dig up Rotterdam's automated docks or Shenzhen's megaterminals and marvel at our ingenuity, or puzzle over our short-sightedness? The answer depends on whether we heed the whispers of the past. The ocean doesn't erase history. It waits for us to piece it together, to learn, and perhaps to do better. If these stories resonated with you, let's keep the conversation going. Hit that like button if you were captivated by these maritime mysteries. Subscribe for more deep dives into forgotten histories, and drop a comment below. What other lost cities or trade routes should we explore next? Your curiosity fuels these journeys, and who knows, the next rediscovery might start with a clue from you. Until then, keep looking beyond the horizon. The past has more to say than we